So I want to spend some time with you kind of pulling together some of the conversation today. I'm talking about developing influence partners. Partners in the sense that we've been talking about, that we really are truly in this together, but we have to figure out what that looks like behaviorally and institutionally. Influence in the sense that we become sources to each other. We can talk about influence in terms of formal power and leadership roles, but we can talk about influence as we've been hearing, particularly in the stories this afternoon, of the way we influence and are influenced from our earliest days, all the way through to the way we influence ourselves in self-leadership, and the way that we influence the people that we work with and that we manage if we're in that kind of leadership role. Developing in the sense that we all have the chance to develop ourselves, we have the chance to be partners with each other, and in the gender partnership idea, we have the chance to be both influential across the gender difference for us as men, as allies and supporters and partners to women, and the same way in terms of that reciprocity back our way. So there's three things I'd like to touch base on today. And I just wanted to show those to you and then tell you a story. The first is about I will pursue personal accountability to lead as a male ally. I will build relationships of trust and reciprocity with women at work, and I will influence other men as peers and allies. One of the dynamics that you notice if you get to attend an event like this is you start to see the diversity of men's voices. We don't all have the same experience. We don't all come at this the same way. But one thing that we do have in common from this morning when we were talking about the business case, we were talking about the story, the business story, and there was a lot of data. There was a lot of discussion about practices and systemic and enterprise issues. This afternoon, in terms of gender partnership, we've heard more about personal stories and the way that connects to who we are now. So one of my observations in the work over the years, particularly with men and with male executives in particular, is that an indicator that we're leaning into this space, that we're showing up and connecting our position power to our leadership results and our relationships, is that we're masters of our own narrative. We know something about our story, and we're not only cognizant of the way that's impacted us in our lives, but it's part of the way we're leading. We're telling our story in a way where people get to know us. I found that particularly useful. I'll tell you about a study we did in a little bit, but we did a study several years ago. It was the first research on white men leading through diversity and inclusion. And one of the not surprising outcomes was that when we as men are willing to speak personally and connect who we are to what we do and what we want to accomplish with people, women often respond very positively because they have a sense of our character. They have a sense of that we're reflective, we're in this with ourselves as well as with women. So this idea that we have a story, we can own it and tell it and share it in a way as a tool and a support for our influence as leaders is really a powerful, I hope, takeaway for you thinking through what your story is as men and women to be able to share it in the right way and make the right difference. So a little bit about my story. I get asked some version of the question like, dude, how did you turn out the way you are? Fairly often. So this is a little bit of the answer to that strange question. I grew up in a church family in the 1960s in Seattle. And for us, being a church family meant that you were paying attention to what was going on in the world. In the 1960s, there was a lot going on in the world. So when Dr. King was assassinated, my parents took me to a racial reconciliation workshop in Seattle. Reverend Woody White, who is now a retired bishop in Atlanta, an African-American pastor. I was 13 at the time. It was the month after Dr. King was assassinated. The pastor looked at me. I don't know if he pointed at me, but it felt like he was. I was 13, and he says, Chuck, I need you to take responsibility for being white. So you become part of the solution and not part of my problem. I just went to this workshop because my parents took me. And here's this like really lovely, passionate, honest man, the kind of man I probably had never experienced before, looking right at me and inviting me to something. And so that was a calling. It was absolutely a vocational moment in my life. And the context I came to understand that one was kind of organized around the racial group that I was born into. He didn't know anything else about me, but as it turns out, when you add in the fact that my grandmother was the first white woman teacher in Kittitas County in Central Washington as a daughter of pioneers, my mom was on the school board. Eventually, the woman I would marry would become a clinical psychologist. So, full disclosure, I've been married to a clinical psychologist for 40 years. Okay. So have at it in terms of projecting what that probably means about me. And eventually having a daughter that's an attorney. So there was already a context for me that I was born into, and the choice that invitation queued up for me was a chance to say, you need to take responsibility for who you are. The things that you didn't choose, the things that you can choose, and then you get to build bridges. So for me, my professional path has been the connection between leadership development and diversity and inclusion. And even though my son's an actor and he says I wear my white guy costume, he puts everything in terms of the theater, and he teaches me a lot. He's 26 now. And so for me, the process of that invitation has been to, as we were talking about at lunch, is to own, to the degree I can be cognizant of it, where I come from, what my choices are. We have a tool we use in our company called the normativity map, and it lists the dimensions of diversity and then what are the normative cultures. And then you get to check the box for how you've been influenced. Until recently, when I continued to breathe and the majority of workers now are millennials, I was, except for now generation, I was check the box for every single box, right? Upper middle class, highly educated, English speaking, healthy, Christian, white, male, American. You know where this list is going, right? The opportunity for me and the invitation to the ally work and to these three ideas has been that I need to own who I am and not deny it or pretend and not deflect from it, but try and live into it in a way where we can make things happen, because that's the leadership accountability. And I have to tell you, my experience around race and around gender is decades of doing stupid stuff and being the recipient of a great deal of grace. And hopefully I don't do this, keep doing the same stuff over and over again, because that would mean I was actually truly stupid. But I apparently am capable of continuing to do stupid things. And I have people in my life, including my son and daughter, who they're nice, they won't say it that way, but they'll correct me when I need to be corrected. So underlying that experience, I think, also speaks to one of the themes that we've also been hearing about today, in addition to mastering our narrative, and that's the nature of, while we're talking about gender and gender allies and gender partnership as the springboard for this work, it is by definition, at the DNA level, literally, intersectional. All of the differences that come up if you get a group of women and a group of men, all of their differences are there. And so to be perfectly straightforward with you, in the last few years, because I'm doing this work, I've been taken aside a lot of times, more than I can count. I have a lot of interesting conversations in hallways, whispered for some reason, I don't know what that means, by women of color saying, you need to talk to these white women. Because if you play the sisterhood card one more time, assuming that we're all dealing with the same thing because we're all women, we're going to freak out. You're white, you're a white dude, go talk to these women. And honestly, I've gotten into some trouble in following that delegation. Because there, as it turns out, shocker, are white women who have done no more work around being white than white men have, right? So there's baked into this expectation. Gender, I'm good with it being the global reality. A lot of us have experience with it. But let's do it in the context of always remembering all manner of differences. Sexual orientation, when we get guys together in a group, and we're diverse in a lot of ways. And do we have work to do as men together around sexual orientation? Oh yeah, we do, right? So I just want us to keep that in mind and call it out specifically, because we've been touching on it time after time here. And while the gender formulation is core, it's definitely not the only way that we're thinking and talking. So let me give you just some ideas about these three ideas. For me, male allies develop the discipline of self-awareness and effective action. My story, self-awareness, effective action in terms of the way we lead in our own lives. Even if we don't have a formal leadership role, we have a responsibility to lead and to think effectively. So this is a tool we use a lot, and we talk about this as a diagnostic, the engagement scale of male leaders. And there's three categories I want to talk a little bit about. Now, these are categories of behavior. These are not labels for men, right?